Have you ever pulled up next to a semi-truck at a red light and just stared at those rear wheels? Two tires, side by side, on every single axle at the back. If you have looked closely enough, you have probably asked yourself why. Why does a truck need two tires where one should do the job just fine? Is it just overkill? Is it tradition? Or is there actually a very specific and very important reason behind it? The answer goes a lot deeper than most people think, and by the end of this video, you are going to look at those wheels very differently. Hi, my name is Jeremy, and this is Trucks United, the channel where we break down everything about the trucking world, from the big engineering decisions to the regulations that shape the trucks you see every day on the highway. First things first, let's make sure we are all looking at the same thing because dual wheels go by a few different names depending on who you are talking to. Truck drivers call them duals. Engineers call them dual tires or dual assemblies. Your neighbor who owns a pickup truck and knows everything about everything will probably call them something wrong entirely. But whatever name you use, the concept is the same. Two tires mounted side by side on the same axle end. So instead of one tire on the left rear and one on the right rear, you get two on each jantpad. That gives you 4 tires across a single rear axle. And on a typical 18-wheeler with 2 rear drive axles, that means you are looking at 16 tires just on the back of the truck alone. Add the 2 front steering tires. And yes, that is exactly where the name 18-wheeler comes from. And honestly, for an embarrassingly long time, I thought that was just a coincidence. It is not. Turns out I should have paid more attention in math class. Now, the dual wheel setup is not something you see on every vehicle on the road. Your car runs on single tires. Your pickup truck runs on single tires, unless you have one of those heavy-duty dually pickups, which uses the exact same basic principle as a semi-truck, just scaled down considerably. If you have ever seen one of those wide fender pickup trucks with the extra tires poking out at the back, like it is trying to take up as much space as physically possible, now you know why duals exist. Same logic, different scale, slightly more aggressive parking behavior. On a semi-truck, the dual wheels are almost always found on the rear axles, specifically the drive axles and any tag or lift axles. The front steering axle almost always runs on single tires, and there is a very good reason for that. The steering geometry on a truck would become incredibly complicated and expensive if you tried to run duals up front. The weight on the front axle is also significantly lower than the rear, so the engineering answer is straightforward. One tire is enough up front. The rear is a completely different story, and that is where things get really interesting. There is also a newer alternative worth knowing about before we go any further. It is called the super single tire, or wide base single tire. Essentially, one very wide tire designed to replace a pair of duals entirely. You are seeing these more and more on modern trucks, and the debate between duals and super singles is one of the most genuinely heated conversations happening in the trucking industry right now. But before we get into that fight, we need to talk about the root of the whole problem. And that problem is weight. The weight problem. Why one tire simply isn't enough. Here is the core issue. A fully loaded semi-truck in the United States can have a gross vehicle weight of up to 80,000 pounds. That is about 36,000 kilograms for our metric friends watching from Europe or Australia. That is an enormous amount of weight being pushed down onto the road surface by a relatively small number of tires. And the road, believe it or not, has a lot to say about how that weight needs to be distributed. Think of it this way. If you were walking across a muddy field, you would sink in much less if you were wearing wide, flat snow boots compared to narrow high heels. The weight is the same, but the surface area changes everything. Tires work on exactly the same principle. The more surface area you have pressing against the road, the less pressure any single point on the road has to absorb. This is called ground pressure, and it is absolutely critical when you are talking about vehicles that weigh as much as a semi-truck. Now here is where regulations come in, and we will get deeper into this in a moment. But the basic rule in most countries is that there are strict legal limits on how much weight any single axle can put on the road. In the United States, the federal limit is 20,000 pounds per single axle and 34,000 pounds for a tandem axle group. These limits exist to protect the road surface. Roads are expensive to build and even more expensive to repair, and an overloaded truck can cause serious and permanent damage to the pavement. So the question becomes, how do you carry more weight without overloading any single axle? One part of the answer is to add more axles, which we have actually covered on this channel before when we talked about lift axles. The other part of the answer is to spread the load across more tires on each axle. That is exactly what dual wheels do. Two tires share the load that one tire would otherwise have to carry alone. The contact patch, the area of the tire that is actually touching the road at any given moment, is doubled. Ground pressure drops, road damage drops, and the axle can legally and safely carry significantly more weight. It really is that simple at its core. But simple does not mean there is nothing else going on, because there absolutely is. One more thing worth mentioning here: tire ratings. Every tire has a maximum load rating, a weight limit it is designed to handle safely. A standard commercial truck tire might be rated for somewhere around 6,000 to 7,000 pounds. So if your rear axle needs to handle 20,000 pounds, you're going to need multiple tires to stay within those individual ratings. Duals are not just a preference. In many cases, they are the only way to stay within the legal and engineering limits of the tires themselves. And if anyone ever tells you that trucking is simple, remind them of that. The safety argument: what happens when a tire blows? Alright, so weight distribution is reason number one. But there is a second reason that is just as important, and this one is about what happens when things go wrong. Because on a truck that is covering hundreds of thousands of kilometers over its lifetime, things will go wrong. Tires fail. It is not a question of if, it is a question of when. If you have ever driven on a highway and seen those long black strips of rubber scattered across the road, you know that truck tires blow out. Those rubber strips are called road gators because drivers joke they looked like alligators lying on the road. Nobody is laughing when they hit one at speed though. When a single tire on a dual wheel setup fails, when it blows out completely, something very important happens. The truck keeps moving. The second tire on that same axle end takes over and supports the load. The driver will feel something. There will be vibration. The handling will change slightly. But the truck does not suddenly drop onto a rim. It does not swerve violently into traffic. The driver has time to safely reduce speed, find a safe place to pull over, and call for assistance. In a loaded truck traveling at highway speed, that redundancy is not a luxury. It is a lifesaver, literally. Now compare that to a single wide base tire blowing out. All the weight on that axle end is on one tire. When it fails completely. The truck drops. The handling changes dramatically and suddenly. At highway speed, with a fully loaded trailer pushing from behind, that scenario can become extremely dangerous very quickly. This is one of the main arguments that truck drivers and fleet operators make against switching entirely to super single tires, and we will come back to that debate shortly. The safety redundancy of dual wheels is one reason regulations in many countries effectively require duals on heavy vehicles. It is not just tradition. It is a calculated engineering and safety decision that has been validated over decades of real-world operation. And honestly, when you think about how much weight these trucks carry and how fast they travel, you start to appreciate how much thought has gone into something as seemingly simple as having two tires next to each other. Regulations shape the tire. Now let us talk about regulations, because like we saw with cab-over trucks versus long-nose trucks, government rules have had an enormous influence on how semi-trucks are designed and built. Dual wheels are absolutely no different. In fact, you could make a strong argument that without government intervention, the trucking industry might have taken a very different path entirely. Regulations have a funny way of making decisions for entire industries, whether those industries like it or not. In the United States, the key piece of legislation here is the bridge formula. Now that sounds incredibly boring, and I am not going to pretend it is the most exciting document ever written. But what it does is actually fascinating. The formula was developed specifically to protect bridges and road surfaces by controlling how much weight can be placed on any given axle or group of axles, based on the distance between those axles. It creates a direct mathematical relationship between axle spacing and maximum allowable weight. That is why you see trucks configured the way they are, with axles spread apart at very deliberate and specific distances. Nothing about that is accidental. Back in the early days of trucking, the rules were much looser. Trucks were lighter, loads were smaller, and the road network was nowhere near as developed or as heavily used as it is today. Nobody was particularly worried about road damage when trucks weighed a fraction of what they do now. But as trucks got bigger and heavier through the 1950s and 1960s, the damage to roads and bridges became completely impossible to ignore. Repair bills were climbing. Infrastructure was taking a beating. And governments on both sides of the Atlantic started paying very close attention. By the time the 1982 Surface Transportation Assistance Act was passed in the United States, the same legislation that changed the trailer length rules we mentioned in our cab-over video, the rules around axle weights and tire configurations had already been tightening steadily for years. 1982 just made a lot of it axle and federal permanent. In Europe, the approach is similarly strict, but applied slightly differently. European axle weight limits exist across the board, and total vehicle weight is generally capped at 40 tons, which works out to roughly 88,000 pounds. The way that weight must be distributed across multiple axles means dual wheels on the rear are not really optional. They are a mathematical necessity to stay within legal limits. Here is what is really worth understanding. The regulations did not just force dual wheels onto trucks. They made duals the most logical, most cost-effective, and most practical solution available within the rules. Manufacturers needed something reliable and scalable that worked across endless load configurations, without reinventing the axle every time a new law landed on their desk. Dual wheels were that solution. And once something works that well, it tends to stick around. The fuel efficiency debate. Are duals actually hurting trucks? Here is where it gets really interesting, and where the trucking industry is genuinely divided right now. As much as dual wheels solve the weight and safety problems, they come with a cost. And that cost is fuel. Every tire that rolls along the road creates what is called rolling resistance. The tire deforms slightly as it contacts the road surface, and energy is lost in that deformation. It is physics, and you cannot argue with physics, believe me, people have tried. With dual wheels, you have two tires rolling, where one could theoretically do the job, and that means more rolling resistance, more fuel consumption, and more emissions. For a truck covering 150,000 kilometers a year, that adds up to a significant amount of extra fuel cost. This is exactly why super singles, the wide base single tires that replace a pair of duals, have become increasingly popular, particularly in Europe. A super single tire has less rolling resistance than two duals combined because it has a more efficient contact patch, shape, and less total sidewall flex. Studies have shown fuel savings of anywhere from 3 to 5% when switching from duals to super singles. For a fleet of hundreds of trucks, that is a very large number on the bottom line. Super singles are also lighter than a pair of duals. Replacing duals with super singles across a truck can save somewhere around 300 to 500 kilograms in unloaded vehicle weight. For freight operators who are paid by the ton, that extra weight capacity translates directly into revenue. So the economic argument for super singles is actually quite compelling. But, and this is a big but, the safety argument brings us right back to where we were. A dual tire blowout is manageable. A super single blowout is considerably more dangerous. And in markets like the United States, where trucks travel at higher speeds across long distances with fewer service stops, that risk calculus looks very different than it does in Europe or in urban delivery environments. There is also the infrastructure argument. Most truck service facilities around the world are set up for dual tires. The equipment, the spare tires, the trained technicians, it is all built around the dual wheel standard. Switching an entire fleet to super singles means a significant investment in new infrastructure and training. And fleet managers love nothing more than a reason to delay a major capital investment. So where does this leave us? The honest answer is that duals and super singles are going to coexist for a long time. Super singles will continue to grow in adoption, particularly in Europe and in regional distribution fleets where the conditions suit them. But for long-haul heavy freight operations, the kind of trucking that built this industry, dual wheels are not going anywhere soon. Why some trucks don't use dual wheels? Now you might have noticed that not every truck on the road runs dual wheels. Delivery vans, smaller box trucks, concrete mixers in some configurations, and various municipal vehicles often run on single tires all the way around. So why does the dual wheel rule not apply to them? The answer comes back to weight. A smaller delivery truck might have a gross vehicle weight of 10,000 to 15,000 pounds. At that weight, the load on each rear axle is well within what a single heavy-duty tire can handle comfortably and legally. The ground pressure is manageable. The tire load ratings are not exceeded. And the maneuverability benefits of running single tires, tighter turning radius, simpler axle design, and easier tire changes make them the obvious choice. It is the same logic that explains why your car runs on single tires. The weight simply does not demand the dual solution. Dual wheels are not inherently better than single tires in every situation. They are the right answer to a specific problem. And that problem is defined by weight, speed, distance, and safety requirements. When those factors are present at the level of a fully loaded 18-wheeler, duals are the answer. When they are not, singles work just fine. There is also a cost consideration. Dual wheels mean double the tires, double the maintenance, double the replacements. For a small delivery operation running lighter vehicles, adding duals would be adding cost and complexity without adding any real benefit. And in business, unnecessary cost and complexity tend to get removed pretty quickly. So there you have it. The real reason semi-trucks run on dual wheels is not one single answer. It is several answers working together. It is about managing enormous weight loads within strict legal axle limits. It is about spreading ground pressure to protect road surfaces. It is about the critical safety redundancy that keeps a truck controllable even when a tire fails at highway speed. It is about regulations that shape the standard over decades of policy development. And it is about a solution that, despite the growing challenge from super single tires, has proven reliable and practical enough to remain the industry standard across most of the world. Next time you are sitting at a red light next to a loaded semi, take a look at those rear wheels. There is a lot of engineering, a lot of regulation, and honestly, a lot of history packed into that simple-looking pair of tires. And now you know exactly why they are there. What do you think? Will super singles eventually replace dual wheels completely, or are duals here to stay? Drop your answer in the comments below. We would love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this video and want to learn more about the real engineering and real decisions behind the trucks you see every day, make sure you subscribe to Trucks United. We have a lot more coming. Thanks for watching.